lot of the book is about politics, is about his, of course, about, his writing about people like Henry Kissinger. A little bit of it is about another book about Hitchens written by this guy, Larry Taunton. The Faith of Christopher Hitchens, The Restless Soul of the World's Most Notorious Atheist, by Larry Allen Taunton. And Larry Taunton is this evangelical who Hitchens would do debates with, but he also became friends with. And it's a really weird book. One thing I definitely, whatever else I got out of it, I got out of it that Larry Taunton is not a very good friend, because he's writing about his dead friend, and he's like suggesting that I don't actually think he was making anything up. Some people did say that. It's like, oh, these were all unverifiable conversations, whatever. I actually don't think that. I think that Taunton was just interpreting what Hitchens said to him in kind of dumb ways. And, because
so he's not a bad friend, just a dummy.
Well, dummy, also bad friend though, because he's
why not both?
Exactly, why not both? Because because a lot of the book is about suggesting that Hitchens was actually wavering in his atheism, towards the end, and that actually maybe he was privately coming around, and the evidence is super duper weak, right? So one of the pieces of evidence has to do with this guy. Let's do. I think I gave this to you second, Jake, but it's from earlier in the video.
Now, it's often said that science cannot give us a foundation for morality and human values because science deals with facts, and facts and values seem to belong to different spheres. It's often thought that there's no description of the way the world is that can tell us how the world ought to be. But I think this is quite clearly untrue. But values are a certain kind of fact. Okay, they are facts about the well-being of conscious creatures. Why is it that we don't have ethical obligations toward rocks?
Why is it?
Why is it?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking you. No. So in the book, Taunton mentions a conversation, with Hitchens. He actually mentions two that are relevant here. One where Hitchens said that he disagreed with Peter Singer, because he couldn't believe that a piglet had the same moral status as a human child. And another is when he said that he thought that Sam Harris's moral theory, which, as you see from that clip, is basically just it's utilitarianism, that he didn't agree with that. That he thought that wasn't really sufficient. That wasn't a convincing moral theory.
Wait. So the idea is that if you're not a utilitarian, your morals must come from some sort of divine command, God-related thing.
Yes.
Well, that seems obviously true.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah. I mean, by the law of disjunctive syllogism, one or the other, not one, therefore the other, so what are you going to do there? Although I've clearly been screwing up because I have been telling my ethics students about all these other theories that aren't utilitarian and have nothing to do with God. So,
yeah.
Oops.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really weird thing. That's like you can't really be an atheist if you're a utilitarian, because if you're not a utilitarian, because those are the choices, right? It's divine commands or utilitarianism. Whereas, and
here my students are, do we have to learn any more theories? And I'm like, no, because we got to learn all these theories about God, because you might not want to be a utilitarian. So let's talk about God some more. I mean, we do cover in some of my ethics classes. I don't do it anymore, but we have covered divine command theory in the past, which does have to do with God.
Sure.
That's the only one.
Yeah. So of course, you might spend a day in ethics class talking about divine command theory. Probably most of that day is spent talking about the Euthyphro dilemma. Although I should say, this is pre This is pre-October 2021 when the Euthyphro dilemma was solved.
Right.
No
point in talking about it anymore.
Yeah, Charlie Kirk has the decisive solution, which is both. But yeah, it seems like besides thinking that divine commands are, the foundation of morality and being a utilitarian, just saying whatever maximizes happiness and minimizes suffering is the right thing no matter what. You might think there's also...
Has he never heard of Kant? For real? Has he never heard of Aristotle?
Yeah. I think it's entirely possible that Larry Taunton has not heard of Kant or Aristotle, or at least has not heard about them in enough detail to know what their ethical views were. But I'm also interested in Sam Harris's reason for being a utilitarian, because of course Sam Harris, the immediate example of a really hardcore GTA fan, as a 29-year-old graduate student whose girlfriend is sick of hearing about how dumb Sam Harris is. To give credit to Sam Harris, he's not going to make an argument for utilitarianism quite as foolish as anything based on like what Larry Taunton is assuming, right? I mean, Sam Harris does know that there have been people who aren't, divine command ethicists or utilitarians who've existed. So he gives he gives a bunch of other arguments, and he thinks in some strange way that you can derive utilitarian morality from science. And this is very confusing. It's not obvious at all what the connection's supposed to be. We were talking about this a little bit last week. But since then, we have discovered a clip of Sam Harris explaining why it's not unreasonable to think that science can tell us what's morally right and wrong by considering an analogy.
Consider by analogy the concept of physical health. I mean, the concept of physical health is undefined, as we just heard from Michael Spector. It has changed over the years. When this statue was carved, the average life expectancy was probably 30. It's now around 80 in the developed world. There may come a time when we meddle with our genomes in such a way that not being able to run a marathon at age 200 will be considered a profound disability. People will send you donations when you're in that condition. Notice that the fact that the concept of health is open, genuinely open for revision, does not make it vacuous. Okay, the distinction between a healthy person and a dead one is about as clear and consequential as any we make in science.
As far as I can tell, Harris's point goes something like this, that health is a science, but health is normative, that, where there's like value judgments about healthy and unhealthy. So there's really no, so even though science is about facts, that doesn't mean that, it's a separate sphere from values. So what do we think about this argument?
So is health itself a science?
See, this is interesting because I was talking earlier today to Lee Phillips, and I think he had a good point about this, right? Which is, you could say, well, health is applied biology, but it's like applied to try to achieve a certain goal, right? That it's like engineering is applied physics, that kind of thing. But the point is that the goal, of course, nobody denies that once you figured out what your goals are, what goals you care about, then like non-moral facts can help you figure out how to achieve those goals. Like, that's completely uncontroversial, right? The David Hume, who was the first person who's making a big deal of the fact value thing, certainly didn't deny that. Made many moral arguments that included factual premises.
I would think that the more you knew, the better you would be at achieving your goals.
Right.
Even if those goals were normative goals.
Yeah, exactly. So you might think, okay, so there's a certain normative health, there's a certain sense maybe in which health is, sure, we're applying biology to meet normative goals, or for that matter, like when Engels uses the phrase, scientific socialism, I don't think, he's suggesting that science somehow tells you
science
that you should want socialism. I think he's saying in that same sort of application sense, you can take what you learn from the social science in order to understand how capitalism works. Now you can get beyond it, whatever, and whatever you think about that, right? Like the science isn't coming in at the normative part, the what you should do part. It's coming in the how do you achieve it, right? So this is the point. Last week we mentioned Kant.
I was here last.
Yes, you were here, but not every individual sentence was one that you spoke.
Well, the good ones were.
For example, I wouldn't want anyone to say, remember when Ben and Jen said roll tide, Yeah,
the good sentences are spoken by me.
But when Kant, to the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, makes the point that the same medical knowledge that can, help a doctor save somebody might also help them to, kill them in a way that nobody would ever find out. The medical science, right? The actual like applied biology that you're using to try to achieve health is not going to tell you, the answer to that. Like it's not going to tell you which goals you should have.
Nope.
Just like, science, sure, science could tell us all sort, especially if we're being expansive about our use of the word science. We're including the social sciences. Always say it that way. Could certainly tell us things about how to achieve moral goals, just the same way it can tell us how to achieve health goals, right? But that doesn't mean that it can tell you which goals you should care about. Like that you should, is it important that people are healthy enough for long enough that they can run marathons when they're 200 years old in the future, or should we not bother with that because resources that could be spent to try to extend life that long in the future could be, better spent on something else. Yes, definitely. When your dad says you still have your health, you can just, oh no, I disagree with the normative premise. I think that this is, and this gets us back to that tweet that we were talking about last time, and I think might be able to sort of more clearly, shed light on what's wrong with it, right? So remember, this was it. Question for the fans of the is-ought impasse in ethics, by which he just means questions for people who think that there really is an is-ought gap, that you can't get your normative goals just from the non-moral facts. Why don't we have a similar problem with reasoning itself? Why aren't we tempted to worry, for example, the fact that A is bigger than B doesn't allow us to say that we ought to believe that A is bigger than B? And I spent probably way too much time thinking about what he's trying to say here.
Did you spend any time thinking about what he was trying to say?
Yes.
That's too much.
So as far as I can tell, the idea is something like this. Think about this little series of comic panels that Andy drew for us. So first panel, if you do such and such, you won't live a long life.
Question mark.
You should, or I guess it should be, shouldn't do such and such. So the point, I think, assuming that we changed it, so the second one was shouldn't, right, which would presumably be the inference that you're supposed to make. The jump from the first panel to the third panel, Harris seems to be saying this is fine, right? If you know that if you do such and such, you won't live a long life, then you can conclude that you should. That you shouldn't do that thing, that, that if you do it, you won't live a long life. Or, if you know that doing such and such means you will live a long life, then you should do that thing. But
what if I don't want to live a long life?
Yeah,
isn't that my business? Who is that to say that that's right or wrong? Is that a moral issue?
Yeah, it's not moral. I think that Harris's idea is that health, you say such and such is healthy, such and such is unhealthy. Mm-hmm. Then, that's, I think he's taking that as a normative concept, or
Why though?
Or at the very least, even if it's not normative, right? Like that.
I don't feel that it is, but that could just be me.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not super invested in either answer to that question, right? You know, like I think probably usually when we say such and such is healthy or such and such is unhealthy, there's usually some kind of implication floating around that you have a reason to do the healthy ones or a reason not to do the unhealthy ones.
Yeah. I'm just not sure that that's a moral issue.
No, again, I don't think it's a moral issue, right? You know, but I think it might be something like a concept of what like the sort of physical aspect of a flourishing life or something that that this is better, even if it's not morally better. You know, it's like there's some respect in which it's better. But if you take it that way, yeah, the point still stands, right? You know, that the premise one, such and such is healthy, conclusion, you should do such and such. Well, that seems like an okay inference, but that's just because we're leaving that question mark in between, right? Like, in other words, that there's an implied premise too, which is that you should do things that are healthy, and you shouldn't do things that are unhealthy. And so similarly, and yes, Andy points out he didn't actually draw this. My mistake. He adapted a pre-existing meme, but he says, you know, go back to his tweet, right? So here's the first premise: object A is bigger than object B.
Question mark.
Here's the conclusion: you should believe that object A is bigger than object B. So, yeah, we do go from premise one to that conclusion, and you know there are various ways of nitpicking this, you know, that like about whether you always have to believe true things or whatever, but like everybody would kind of understand what you meant if you say, yeah, you know, why should you believe that one? Because it's true, right? But that's because that question mark, right? You know, what we've got, that implied second premise is you should believe true stuff, and
which is not itself always true.
Yeah, right. So this is, yeah, we talked about this a little bit last week, you know, that at the very least, you know, yeah, I mean, like, it
provides a reason for believing, or for a reason why you should believe it, but there could also be overriding reasons.
Yeah, or even like, I mean, like, there are lots of true things you don't have evidence for. You might think if you're asserting that it's true, there's some implication, you know. Like, we could nitpick this forever. You know, certainly any version of you should believe true stuff that like holds universally would probably have to have a whole bunch of caveats in it. Like,
we're philosophers. We love caveats.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, you know, because nobody's saying that you have an epistemic obligation to go
around. We're going to lawyer this to death.
You know, spend every minute of the day forming true beliefs about every single individual, you know, blade of grass, you know, in the backyard. But the idea that in some sense it's good to believe stuff that's true is relatively uncontroversial and relatively uninteresting. The same way, don't do stuff that'll shorten your life is a relatively uninteresting sort of norm of, you know, behavior, whether it's exactly a moral one or not. But when you take the sort of moral examples, especially you think about the kinds of conclusions that Sam Harris derives from his utilitarian morality, like he'll say like, oh, you know, ticking time bomb case, you know, you should clearly torture that guy. And it seems like now premise one is, torturing terrorism suspects to get them to tell us where the bombs are will prevent more suffering than it causes.
Question mark.
Conclusion is we should torture terrorism suspects to get them to tell us where the bombs are. And it seems to me that this is very importantly unlike the previous two examples, because, do things that are good for your health and, you know, will make you live longer, try to believe true stuff and avoid believing false stuff. You know, these are like relatively uncontroversial.
So torturing someone is going to help you live longer.
No. Yeah, but
I may have gotten mixed up.
You know, what would go in the question mark, right? What would go in the implied second premise here would be it's always right to do things that will prevent more suffering than they cause. And that's a lot more controversial and interesting than try to, pay attention.
But if you don't believe that, then divine command theory is your choice of ethical theory.
Yeah, that's what Larry Taunton thinks.
See how it all comes back around?
Yeah. Like if you're going to fill in the blank for that question mark, for the
I'm glad you let me read the question mark boxes. That was really fun.
What would go in those blanks for the health case and the believe true stuff case? Even with all the caveats that would have to go for believe true stuff to make that precisely accurate. Yeah. If you're an analytic philosopher and you want to lawyer this, granted, right? But,
Ben tells me that I love to lawyer stuff to death.
I do, because she does.
I do.
But the general idea that you should try to swim towards truth and away from falsity is not super controversial. And the general idea that you should, pay attention to your health is not super controversial. Whereas absolutely anything that leads to better consequences is therefore morally better is, it's a lot more controversial. In fact, partially because of cases like this. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.